Welcome to Dragons, Gazelles, and Unicorns. I'm Rosemary Truman, founder and CEO of the Center for Advanced Innovation, and welcome to the podcast. Today's podcast is going to be very special. I'm thrilled to have Kolaleh Eskandanian, Chief Innovation Officer of Children's National, and Vasum Peiris, Chief Medical Officer and Director for Pediatrics and Special Populations at the FDA-funded Devices in Radiological Health. These luminaries will speak today about innovation in children's health. Welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining today.
A pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Thanks for having us.
I'd love to start by having you all talk a little bit about your background in your careers.
You want to go first, Kolaleh?
You go first, Vasum. Vasum always goes first. I'll follow you. Yes.
You're very kind. Sure. So as you mentioned, I currently serve as the Chief Medical Officer for Pediatrics and Special Populations here at the FDA, our Center for Device and Radiological Health. Prior to joining the FDA, I was Chief and an endowed professor at the Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center. I was Chief of Pediatric and Adult Congenital Cardiology there. Prior to that, spent a great many years in training and college at Yale and Harvard and University of Vermont. And before that, I grew up in California. So I'm truly a Californian by heart.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I'm Kolaleh Eskandanian. I'm with Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C. I'm Vice President and Chief Innovation Officer there. My background is in mechanical engineering, so you can say that I'm a recovering nerd and actually rocket scientist turned into pediatric health innovation. But I got my undergraduate degree in physics, mathematics, my master's in mechanical engineering, and my PhD in economics and management science. So my first real non-academic job was with Intelsat, which at that time had the monopoly over all satellite services in the world. So I worked there as a young professional before I went back to school to get my MBA. I was then recruited by Accenture to join their telecommunications and high-tech practice area. And it was just, a pure accident that I was meeting with one of my mentors, a professor from Georgetown University, who was describing to me this big problem in healthcare, that it was so difficult to capture adverse events and analyze them. And this is early 2000, after gene therapy had gone bad in clinical trials, and Jesse Gelsinger, an 18-year-old, had died. So at that time, NIH decided to make the position of research subject advocate mandatory for all academic medical centers that were heavily involved in research. And so Georgetown University was one, and Dr. Vegas, my professor, was appointed by Georgetown to be the research subject advocate. So she was describing this big problem that we don't know how to do this. And having just completed a telecommunications project for one of my clients, I said, well, what's so difficult about it? We just did something similar for a phone company. I'm pretty sure we can do the same for clinical trials. So for the phone company, we did a trouble entry management system. And so fast forward, I was recruited by Georgetown University, and there I developed the first ever adverse event reporting system used in an academic setting in clinical trials. So that was my transition from industry mechanical engineering to nonprofit healthcare. Then I was recruited by Children's National to come and help Children's National submit a CTSA grant, a Clinical and Translational Science Award. And so we were the first and still the only standalone children's hospital that has one of those 60-something prestigious awards. In 2011, Children's National got a large transformational gift to opened the Sheikh Zayed Institute for Pediatric Surgical Innovation. And so I was invited to be the executive director and run that institute, and the rest is history. I'm still here.
Wow, that is quite a journey. From telecom to consulting services to chief information officer. I love it. I love it. Quite a myriad of opportunities. So could you tell us a little bit about what innovation you see in the horizon in children's health?
I'll let you take this one first, Kolaleh.
This one first, alrighty. I hope that Vasum agrees with me, but I think that, because children's innovation lags behind by some 10 years, I see that any innovation would be a breakthrough. Any innovation in pediatrics would be a breakthrough. So, being in a small market, we don't have the type of luxury that our adult counterparts have. You see more innovation in adult setting. And, we're kind of the recipient maybe, after something is tested in the adult population. But I would like to see more implantable devices, life-saving devices that kids need so direly right now. They're not, as Vasum can tell you the statistics better than I, pretty much our physicians find themselves using devices off-label. This is, this is the status quo, this is the standard, and we would like to reverse that.
Yeah, that's a perfect point, Kolaleh. I think you really encompassed what's going on very well. To answer your question very simply, Rosemary, I'd like to see innovation across the board. There is as Kolaleh mentioned, it's almost just an accepted standard that in pediatrics, we have to use everything off-label. It hasn't been evaluated, designed for, approved for, or cleared by the FDA for children in the vast majority of cases. And novel technologies that can really make a significant difference in morbidity and mortality for any patient, especially pediatric patients, they're not getting access to those novel technologies at a similar rate as adults. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the adult standard needs to be the gold standard for children. But what it does mean is that the entire system is not necessarily working effectively and efficiently to truly bring pediatric specific devices designed for pediatrics, evaluated for pediatrics, approved for pediatrics to the pediatric market so that both the physicians, the caregivers, the children and their families can actually have tested devices that have been shown to be safe and effective for their specific needs. So we really need to be thinking about how to innovate and how to appropriately innovate for this market.
So I can imagine for implantables, it's very complicated. Since children, you make the implant, and if you're using a device off-label, then you're using an adult implant, and then the child grows, and then probably the implant has to be changed, and you probably have to use another adult implant. It probably even creates more complication if you're using the adult implantables. So what do you think, what are the barriers to creating more implantables, more innovation in childhood health? I know it's very, very difficult to do clinical trials for children because if the kid has an adverse effect, as you were mentioning, with the adverse effect tracking system, the mother or the father will likely take the kid out of the clinical trial, which causes a lot of churn in the clinical trials. I mean, I don't know, is that one of the root causes? What are the problems with having peds clinical trials, or the barriers?
Kolaleh?
No,
you first to me.
Yes, I think that Vasum has a perfect example of this. Implantable. It's not the technology. Definitely, technology is not a barrier. The smallest pacemaker exists and it's in the market, but it's labeled for adults, not pediatrics.
Yeah.
So from there, I want to transition it to Vasum. So you can. You have worked on this subject for so long, and tell us about what you see, and I can follow up on that. What you see as the true barriers.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kolaleh. I think you set it up perfectly. Let's take a look at the technology, right? One of the things that I always say, and that Kolaleh just mentioned, is that technology no longer is the barrier. The systems and the support structures and the economies of scale, that's the barrier. Going to the specific example that Kolaleh set up in terms of pacemakers, implantable devices like you brought up, those technologies have advanced significantly over the last few years. If we go back a couple of decades, we were at a state where, in my field, in congenital heart disease or in just general adult pacemaking and electrophysiology, some of these pacemakers actually sat outside the heart and wires went into the heart. Over time and during my era of medicine, we've gotten to the point where we're able to put pacemakers that are the size of maybe a silver dollar or a little bit bigger into the subpectoral pocket and then run wires into the heart. So that's a huge step forward. And then very recently, just a couple of years ago, we at the FDA have approved the first transcatheter pacing system. And just so, again, that technology has become smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's the key point that Kolaleh and I are mentioning, that, this is not, the technology isn't the limiting factor, because despite the technology being available, despite the ability to be able to use some of those technologies for the needs in pediatrics, that device, for a number of other reasons as well, including the introduction system, which is a little bit larger than necessary for pediatrics, but simply put, the technology is available, but those types of devices are not being specifically labeled or evaluated for children. And there's a number of different reasons why that is. One of them is this perception that there is a smaller market. And in truth, there is a smaller market. However, I think we can begin to create the right alignment around the system and the market needs in order to incentivize companies and innovators to be able to enter the market, sustain in the market, and innovate in the market. That's really what we need to get to.
So what kind of implantables are you thinking that are the most needed?
Yeah, I would say that across the board, as I've mentioned before, there's a need in pediatrics. The areas that certainly have a great deal of focus in terms of technology development generally for adult markets tend to be the ones that also have areas of focus for pediatric markets. So cardiology, neurology, ophthalmology, endocrinology is evolving as well. So those types of areas in orthopedics are certainly the areas where there is a need, and perhaps the technology has moved forward so well in the adult markets that we're starting to see, obviously, similar increases in pediatrics. But again, fundamental point is there is a huge need across the board for pediatrics. And let me just give you a couple of easy numbers to kind of really set the stage here. At the FDA, we think about these high risk, but also high benefit devices as what we call class 3 devices. And they usually go through two specific regulatory pathways, either the PMA, pre-market approval, or the HDE, humanitarian device exemption pathway. And that pathway is for smaller populations, less than 8,000. But those are the two pathways. Very simply put, if we take a look over the last decade, of the number of PMAs and HDEs that have been approved for pediatrics or labeled for pediatrics, it's a relatively small number. We see about 23% or so across the board over the last decade, and that percentage is relatively a flat, stagnant line of about 23, 22, 24%, despite the fact that overall the total numbers that are being approved for adults have generally been increasing year by year. And then when we take it one step deeper, when we take a look at that 23% that are approved for pediatrics, because pediatrics at CDRH is defined as 0 all the way up to the day before your 22nd birthday. So the vast majority of that 23% are really in the 18 to 22 range or 18 to 21 range. And about less than 10% of all of those novel technologies that are making a difference in adult lives, labeled for adult lives, designed for adult patients, only about 10% are actually labeled or indicated for pediatric patients 0 to 18, and less than 4% for the toddler age, 0 to 2. And that neonatal age, that's the age in pediatrics where there certainly is a great need for technologies that can make a difference, especially with respect to congenital diseases. So really a very small number overall that are being, again, designed, evaluated, and approved for pediatric patients.
Is the failure rate higher for approval?
Sorry, I missed your question.
Is the failure rate higher for pediatric indications?
That's a great question. You know, I guess the assumption there is that if you have the same amount of number of applications coming in for pediatrics, is the real problem the fact that, hey, the failure rate is higher or they're just not getting approved? And that's not the case. More often than not, we're just not seeing as many of these novel technologies with companies coming in specifically requesting pediatric indications. There is that notion sometimes that, hey, if you come to the FDA and you want a pediatric indication, it's going to be far more complex. It's not very clear. There's going to be a great deal of variability in what the requests and the evidence generation are. Well, I want to let people know we really are working towards ensuring that we're using least burdensome methods. We want to collect the right amount of information for the indication at the right time. Our intent is to develop the right scientific background to be able to have those devices approved for children. So if you're interested, you have a great device that you think can make a difference in pediatrics, please come in, speak with us, speak with our teams. We're more than happy to figure out the least burdensome method to be able to get that device to the US market on label for pediatrics so it can actually make a difference in children's lives.
So whoever's listening to this is a call to action from Vasum. Talk to the FDA. So has the pandemic highlighted new areas that need to be addressed for children?
Kolaleh, you want to go for this one first, or?
Sure, yes, certainly. And just recently in July, we had a COVID-19 edition of our Make Your Medical Device Pitch for Kids competition, because we saw that there was a need for technologies that physicians as well as patients and families could use at home for home health monitoring. So they didn't have to come to the hospital if they didn't need to. So that really increased the need for applications for home health monitoring, wearables. And so we had a competition on July the 20th, and we selected 8 companies as a result who demonstrated that they had interesting solutions for this pandemic situation, but also post-pandemic, because we likely will do things very differently even post-pandemic. So I think if there is any silver lining, there shouldn't be any, but if there is any silver lining in this pandemic is that new technologies have emerged, and thanks to the FDA, you know, some of them have received emergency use authorization to be used immediately in the clinics.
Yeah. I've got to say, the pitch competitions that our Pediatric Device Consortia, the FDA-sponsored Pediatric Device Consortia across the country are doing, are making a significant difference in people really refining, honing these technologies, being aware of these technologies, investors being interested in supporting those technologies. And as you must know, Kolaleh is the PI for the PDC at Children's National, and we have 4 other campuses across the country as well.
I should go back and mention this competition was funded thanks to the grants that we have from the FDA. And, you know, I guess that we can talk a little bit more about that, but this program has really helped push the needle forward in terms of bringing more pediatric devices to the market, or even, you know, increase awareness around the unmet need of children, you know, having devices that were specifically designed and tested in kids. So we're not jerry-rigging an adult device and try it in a child. Yeah. So great program. And, maybe we can talk about incentives, because this program came out of a legislation in 2007, the Pediatric Medical Device Safety and Improvement Act, that became law in 2007. And one of the conditions was the establishment of the Pediatric Device Consortium grant program. And today there are 5 consortia in the country. And this program has been in effect since 2007. Children's National got one of those grants in 2013. And it's been great. That shows you that, incentives in terms of carrots, which is this program, provides grant support to startup companies, as well as consultation services, facilitation of meetings with the FDA, and everything that a small company needs to bring their novel device idea for kids to the market. And we need more of that. We need definitely more incentives in that form. It's great, it's not enough yet.
Yeah, and specifically for your audience, that is, part of that small innovation ecosystem where a great deal of novel technologies are really being considered for pediatrics specifically. The PDCs are a great resource. They're available, as Kolaleh said, across the country. Any one of the PDCs, you can find the PDC listing on our FDA Office of Orphan Products Development website under the PDC listing. All the contact information is available there as well. And if any of the innovators want to reach out to the PDC PIs to be able to get the consulting services that Kolaleh mentioned free of charge, they should certainly do that and be able to get a little bit more awareness of the ecosystem, what the regulatory process is. Certainly some of the campuses have unique comparative advantage in certain areas that perhaps they can assist with. And if they can't assist, they can always refer you to one of the other PDC campuses as well. They certainly work as a network. And we, as part of the maturation model for the PDCs over the last few years, we have been encouraging the programs to really move forward from just campus-focused programs to community-focused programs, to regional-focused programs, to statewide focused programs. And we're hoping that we can get to a point where this will truly be a national network of pediatric device consortia with innovators that can support staff that can make a significant difference to help move the technologies forward, especially for the small innovator that has a fantastic idea but may not necessarily have the resources or the knowledge to be able to navigate the system. The PDCs are there to assist.
Okay. So there's a lack of implantables, there's lack of innovation across the board, but there is some support from these PDC PIs to understand more about the regulatory process. So if you have something that you think could be used for children, there's some support there for you. What do you think is in play to create more of the carrots?
Yeah, that's a great one. Let me at least contextualize this a little bit historically and not too far back, but just a couple of years ago. So back in 2018, the CDRH and my team led a public meeting specifically focused on pediatric medical device development. I'll highlight a couple of great things about the meeting, which were really unique. Generally, when we have public meetings of this nature at the FDA, usually the ones that get a lot of registrants, a lot of people interested, a lot of attendance, are the ones that are really the big economies areas. Cybersecurity, very cool, very sexy, very big economy. Biomarkers, very cool and sexy, and lots of good things that can happen for the public. Pediatric areas have not historically really seen much attendance. Digital health gets 900 or 1,000 or so or more registrants. Pediatric focused meetings, even on the drug side, sometimes get tens to hundreds. Well, for pediatric devices, back in 2018, we saw something, I think, that is historical, that really lets us know that there's a great deal of interest in the market. We saw nearly 900 people register for that meeting. That's a huge change from what we've seen in the past. It's certainly one of the the more registered meetings in pediatrics in history at the FDA. And it really does reflect that there is a burgeoning interest, perhaps a burgeoning market here. And we want to be able and ready to support that burgeoning market. At the public meeting, we really tried to focus on three major areas of the ecosystem. And very simply put, those areas were, how do we optimize the evidence generation infrastructure, right, for clinical trials? How do we consider the right legislation for the right market? Because legislation that has perhaps made a difference in pediatric drug development may not necessarily be the right types of legislation that could make a difference in the pediatric device market. And then we also needed to focus on another area that we don't generally tend to consider as often at the FDA, but one of the key points that I made is to have this conversation around this long-standing public health need without truly addressing the economic and financial aspects is relatively, I would say, a moot, because those three areas are very important. So the third area that we focused on were, how do we create the right market for pediatric device development? How do we create a supportive marketplace? And we focused on a few examples of pediatric device-focused businesses that are thriving and that are certainly doing well. We focused on areas that we can improve on, but across those three areas of evidence generation, legislation, and a supportive marketplace, what we really tried to ascertain are, what really are those challenges, right? What's really going on that are perhaps preventing people from once again entering the market, sustaining in the market and innovating in the market? And I think the key factor that our live audience polls verified for us is that it really does center around the economy of scale. The fact that there isn't there are a number of different hurdles, perceived or true, and perhaps what we need to be thinking about is, by reducing or mitigating those hurdles, then potentially we could improve return on investment for the individuals and the innovators and the companies that are willing to enter this market. And from that, from all the information that we gathered at the public meeting, we thoughtfully put together a strategic framework. That strategic framework is called SHIP, S-H-I-P, or at least it's been coined that. It stands for System of Hospitals for Innovation in Pediatrics. It's certainly more than just a hospital network. It truly is a strategic framework to create an ecosystem across the nation that supports innovation in pediatric medical technology development. We want to be able to overcome or at least reduce many of those hurdles that we discussed at the public meeting, and be able to create the right supportive, incentivized atmosphere that begins to shift traditional business thinking around entering the market. We right now have moved into phase 1 of SHIP development. CDRH has provided some seed funding to begin to develop phase 1. We have provided this through a grant to CPAT. CPAT is the Critical Path Institute. CPAT is leading coordination of phase 1 of the SHIP development process. We've set up an executive committee and a coordinating committee to be able to ensure that we meet the deliverables of this grant in a very efficient manner. And the key deliverables of this phase 1 of development are really 3 areas. Let me just quickly let you know what those are. We'll be holding a public meeting / workshop, and that currently is being scheduled for early February. And that public meeting workshop is really intended to further vet the SHIP concept, to get feedback on the concept, iterate on the concept where necessary, and make sure that the entire ecosystem that is interested, all the stakeholders across the ecosystem that are really interested in this area, are able to both understand the concept and give their feedback on how we can improve on specific areas of the strategic framework. Number 2, we want to develop within 6 months of the public meeting a strategic plan for phase 2 of SHIP development. And then number 3 is a little bit more ancillary, but we want to ensure that there is a meeting proceedings document that is published into the academic literature so that people are aware of all the concepts that were discussed and the issues that were discussed, and so that that stands as a foundation from which to continue additional work, because there's certainly many individuals with fantastic ideas across the globe and across the nation that can certainly continue to assist and move this work forward. But very simply put, we're looking forward to that, to the workshop. And let me give you a little bit more detail there. If I can take a couple more minutes. We've set the work streams up to develop key areas around the SHIP concept prior to the workshop. And those work streams really focus on five areas, very simply. Work stream 1 is really intended to figure out what's the entire journey through the SHIP process. How does a company or a device navigate the process? What it qualifies you to enter into the SHIP system and truly go through the SHIP system, and what does it mean to be success having gone through the SHIP system. In addition to that, the other work streams are focusing on areas of reimbursement. How do we optimize reimbursement for pediatric specific medical devices? The hospital work stream right now is taking a very high level look at what would qualify you to be a SHIP hospital, because we need to have the breadth and depth of infrastructure to safely evaluate these novel technologies. It's not something that can happen at any health system. There really are probably just a few of these health systems across the country that truly have that breadth and depth of infrastructure. We then have a finance work stream. The finance work stream is looking at a few different areas, but one of their key charges is how do we make SHIP a financially sustainable, independent entity, both for its own administration. In addition to that, we're taking a look at areas where how can we begin to support investment into the pediatric medical device market, help I would say maybe venture capitalists might not be the right market for this, but at least for mission-driven funds, family funds, angel investors, and others, and perhaps some venture capitalists that want to help. We want to figure out how can we create a finance structure that not only supports these devices and the infrastructure that we're developing, but also provides some returns to the investors that are interested. In addition to that, finally, we're looking at the regulatory work stream. The regulatory work stream really is, I've charged them with trying to think outside the box in terms of how can we most effectively collaborate between regulators and the SHIP ecosystem in order to help facilitate the right clinical trial designs, the study populations, and everything around the regulatory process to be able to streamline those types of issues to ensure that we can support pediatric medical device development. It absolutely does not mean that we are reducing the bar in any way. That is absolutely not the case. The bar is always going to be one of the highest in the world, and that bar of safety and effectiveness, or safety and probable benefit for HUD and HDEs will always stand, and our evidentiary standards will always stand. But we want to figure out how can we make the system work more effectively to address this long-standing public health issue of a lack of device development for pediatrics. So it's a broad overview. Happy to go into some details. Kolaleh is leading our work stream, is one of the co-leads of our work stream for hospitals. So I'm sure she has a great deal of insights to add as well.
Oh, this is great. So the phase 1 early February workshop, it's going to be open to the public, you said?
Yes.
And where can people find out more about that?
Once we get closer to the date, we'll be releasing a media platform and strategy to make sure that as many people are aware of it as possible. This is, your audience is probably one of the first to get the big news. And
so you're going to go to the meeting and learn about the journey through the SHIP process, reimbursement, how to be a SHIP hospital, finance, what are the supportive elements, the investors in this area, like family offices. In fact, we have an initiative called Innovate Children's Health. It's a challenge, and it's supported by a family office. So family offices are a great target. Cherry Sobrato, Resonance, Philanthropy is supporting it. And the last stream was regulatory. Is that right? So if you want to learn about those, look out for that early February meeting.
Yes.
And I know, Kolaleh, you have some great innovative initiatives. And I was It was an honor to be a judge in the challenge that you had. You had some amazing startups. It was thrilling. Could you tell us more about some of your innovation initiatives?
Sure. Even though my focus and interest is pediatric medical devices, but as Chief Innovation Officer for Children's Hospital, I oversee other areas where innovation happens as well. Specifically, there are 5 centers within our research and innovation enterprise. They're cancer and immunology, genetic medicine, neuroscience research, investigational therapeutics, and translational science. And then the 5th and youngest one is the Institute for Pediatric Surgical Innovation, when device innovation happens. But my focus is devices. My job is to oversee all innovation. So I mentioned the Sheikh Zayed Institute, which was established in 2011. It was thanks to that transformational gift and the establishment of that institute that for the first time, Children's National started to introduce the notion of innovation. Until then, we were a very strong research enterprise, ranked always in the top 10, if not top 5 best hospitals, best children's hospitals in terms of research. But our research was primarily for NIH grants and publication in high impact journals, which is fantastic. But we were not doing anything to translate the great discoveries to the market. So although we started thinking about that, starting 2011, but we are moving forward very fast. So there is probably a merit to be the lagger in this market, because we didn't have any bad habits that we had to carry on. Just to give you, some metrics, just in the past, past 9 years or so, Children's National spun out over 20 companies that came out of the IP from Children's National, and we have licensed out our IP to some of these companies that we also spun out. So that's one way, especially, being in a pediatric market. One of the fastest way to get something to market is through startup companies, because increasingly we see that, the top 10 pharma or top 10 medtech companies are simply not allocating R&D dollars for pediatric products. So we are in the business of supporting startups and small businesses, and we're seeing, some of the fantastic fruits just in the past 9 years. You may also know, and your audience may also know, that we're in the process of building the first in its kind research and innovation campus on the former Walter Reed Medical Center, Army Medical Center property. So our innovation anchor partner is Johnson & Johnson J-Labs. We have an academic partner, Virginia Tech, that is moving to campus. And J-Labs will start in January to operationalize and host the resident companies, and Children's National is moving in July. So that's very exciting because first, out of the necessity for space, we had to find more space for our research enterprise. But so this campus presented that opportunity for space, but we wanted to do more than that, not just, move research from building A to campus B, but see how we can leverage, how we can attract the industry to work with us, and other like-minded entities, such as the group from Virginia Tech that is moving to work with us. They're specifically interested in pediatric oncology. So we want to do, we want to take this opportunity and take that research and innovation campus, make the most out of it, and to see the much needed pediatric medical products coming out from the collaboration that will be happening in the next 5 to 10 years.
I've got to say this.
Yes.
I was going to say, it's fantastic to hear about this. Every time I hear about them, it's always very exciting. Obviously, there's a lot of work beyond the device area, but the key thing that I always resonate with is the collaboration and the fact that we are getting to a stage where it really begins to make sense for a lot of these organizations to align around this cause, especially with the SHIP initiative that we're doing at the FDA. It's wonderful to see some of these key stakeholders come together around this need and this longstanding public health need, and that public sector, private sector interaction to really try to address this is hopefully going to make the biggest difference as we move forward, because it's really only together that we can make this a sustainable solution that really addresses what has not been sufficiently addressed by our health system for so long.
Well, I know, I mean, I have to tell you, this Innovate Children's Health Challenge that we're running right now, the purpose is to spin out 15 new companies in the children's health area using technology that's sitting on the shelf. So we basically have a competition and an accelerator program that goes across 8 months, and teams from around the world can come into the challenge and pick an invention and form a startup around it. And then at the end, we have an investor forum. So this challenge is actually, look at, we're in a 9th challenge. We've launched 335 companies over the last 5 years. And this challenge has got the most traction, the most interest. It's the most number of entries so far. And it's really quite exciting. The investor base that has come forward as well. So I agree with you. It's about, we're really galvanizing an enormous ecosystem here in a few different ways. I have to say that I saw at Children's National, the 3D printer they're using in the Institute for Surgical Innovation to print out models that surgeons can play with or not test to see how the surgery is going to go. And I think actually on another note, I think Chris Lee is involved with your financial stream.
Yes.
The financial stream?
Chris is one of the co-leads of our finance work stream.
That's great. So he's a friend of mine. We're working with him as well.
Yeah. Chris is fantastic.
I know he is. He's part of the club. So are there any other innovative initiatives? I mean, Kolaleh, I think you wanted to mention something that we're working on.
Yes, so I'm very excited about the initiative that I'm working with you, Rosemary. Together, we're working on the Pediatric Health 2021. So that is exciting. And together, Rosemary and I just wrote a grant. We submitted that grant to NIH and IDDK. And I'm very optimistic, when I see call for applications coming out of NIH and, other granting institutions that focus on innovation. It's not often that you see those type of opportunities. So there was one that came out of NIH and IDDK, and we immediately jumped on the opportunity, and fingers crossed, we think that we have a great application out there, and we'll know more, I guess, in November and hopefully next year. But that is important. That's very important because, NIH and other sponsoring agencies have been so focused on knowledge discovery, which is very, very important. But it's encouraging to also see opportunities now for innovation. I mean, clearly they see that, all the good stuff that's happening on the benches, they need to make sense and ultimately come to the market, right? So you don't do science for the shelves and decorating CVs, but you have to really impact health.
Yes. And you've heard today, everybody on the podcast is listening, you've heard today there's several platforms that you can get involved with to boost children's health. We have SHIP. We have the challenge that Children's National has out there and has regularly, that's supported by the FDA. We have the Innovate Children's Health Challenge. We have 2021 Innovate Children's Health Challenge coming up. There's lots of exciting things, and it's all, there's an unmet need, and there's this enormous opportunity to do that translation that we're talking about. And you know, everyone's on this. I'm thrilled to have you all on this podcast talking about all the innovation that's occurring and all the work that's going on to improve the ability to get pediatric and children's inventions to market. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave the audience with today? I could talk to you all forever. I mean, I had so many questions written down, but I thought, what are 9 more minutes?
Yeah, Vasum, do you want to go first?
I was just going to say, you know, one of the things that, you know, since I've been working in this field now for a few years, one of the things that's always really nice to see and just exciting for me is all of these pitch competitions. There's so much enthusiasm, science, business, social aspects. There's a little bit of everything is coming together around these types of innovations for children. And it's just, it's wonderful to see. What I'm hoping that we'll be able to do together with the FDA leading is to really begin to help create that platform where all of these exciting ventures have an infrastructure within which to be able to safely, effectively, and appropriately move forward when they're ready, so that we can begin to get these devices out to children. It's not just an idea that somebody has, but it truly does make that transition from that nascent idea to all the work that goes into it. But then there's a support system that allows them to get to where they need to go, and that where they need to get to go is fundamentally to the hands of the caregivers, the clinicians, the families, and the children that truly need these types of devices to make a difference in their health. So it's an exciting time, and I'm glad to see the momentum rising around these areas.
And I guess that, you know, from my perspective, I really would like to see more the D in development added to the R in research. You know, we've done a great job, you know, spending billions and billions of dollars doing great research, and we have to make sure that we are maximizing those dollars. And it's not only, you know, IP for the shelves, collecting digital dust or physical dust, but at the end of the day, you know, we do research to bring novel therapies to the market. So it's important for academic medical centers to think about, you know, what else they should be investing in terms of adding the development to the research side of the business.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. I think we spend 140 to 160 billion dollars on R&D, and only 0.01% of it gets translated out. So we estimate about $3 trillion worth of intellectual property just sitting on the shelf, collecting dust in a dark room with the door locked. But we all have a mission to get those moving. So you have Kolaleh, and we are creating companies, starting companies to get these inventions moving, and then you get to go over to the FDA to get them approved. So you have a complete support infrastructure here, I can see. Okay, I have one last question for you. When the pandemic is under control, what's the first place you're going to go?
Vasum, you go first.
It would be great to be able to go back home for a little bit, see my family, and also, which is California, and also just spend a few days on the beach. Love the ocean, love the waves. I spent so many summers with my dad body surfing on the beach, so it's one of those things that I just truly enjoy.
I must say the same thing. You know, I would like to go to the West Coast, Northern California, to visit family. So miss that a lot. So hopefully it can happen very soon.
Well, I've been to the beach.
I know Rosemary goes every week.
Well, I just actually went into the water for the first time 2 weeks ago, and I body surfed. I can't believe how old I am. I've never been. I lost all those years, but I have to tell you, I love it now.
Body surfing is the greatest thing. Boogie boarding and body surfing. Yeah, surfing is pretty cool as well.
I got up on the board for 1 second. I was so proud of myself. Like, stood up.
Wow, go Rosemary. Yay. Awesome.
It is a feeling of accomplishment, right? When you first do it. It's a lot harder than it looks.
Oh gosh, yes. Well, thank you again for your valuable insights and your time and the guidance you provided the audience today. I know that it's been great. I look forward to catching back up with you in 2021.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
yes.
Rosemary.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.